Welcome to the serialized version of my book, You're the Last Person I Thought Could Quit Smoking. I hope you'll use it to finally stop killing yourself with cigarettes. Watch all the chapters and learn why and how I quit after 45 years of loving to smoke a lot. Welcome back. This is Chapter 3, You Can't Stop. There are several reasons I'm sharing so much of Linda's personal story with you in this book about how to quit your own cigarette habit. Linda's trauma is at the root of how and why I developed my method for quitting, and I can't really convey how much of a smoker I was and how smoke-free I am now without recounting the entire series of events. But there are valuable, serious, individual elements of the whole that make Linda's hospitalization relevant to and worthy of inclusion here. As smokers, we either ignore or make ourselves believe the incredibly well-established research into the health dangers associated with smoking cigarettes, and we also conveniently rely on other really silly bullshit rationales to keep smoking. We keep smoking even though our family and friends want us to quit, even though it's bad for our gums, teeth, breath, clothes, lungs, and heart, even though there's no positive benefit whatsoever from it. I know that. As I say over and over, I've been there. And I quit because I had to. Not because of something that happened to me, but because the reality of my future with Linda depended on whether I could make myself stop smoking. In essence, the decision was a no-brainer. It's the truth for you, too. It's a no-brainer. You should quit smoking. The basis for quitting has nothing to do with anything other than what all of us know, that there is no rational, non-selfish reason to smoke. You smoke because you started, continued, and now your body and your brain need regular infusions of nicotine because nicotine is an addictive substance. The longer you've smoked, the more uncomfortable it is to stop. But you can stop. To believe otherwise is irrational and not factually accurate. You can stop. I know that now. I didn't have a choice because I couldn't continue living as a smoker if I wanted to remain with the woman I loved for the rest of my life. I quit. You can quit. And you don't have to have your own life-threatening situation to use as an excuse or a reason. I went through that for you, and along the way, I realized that I couldn't control what was happening to Linda, but I could damn well control whatever was necessary when and if I could hold Linda in my arms. So, Linda's illness, aside from being the catalyst for devising my method, is integral to all of this because we emerged from what could have been a tragic period. I knew what was important and what wasn't, and cigarettes had no place in our lives. In your heart and mind, you know that they have no place in your life, too. And once cigarettes are out of your life, you'll still be around, doing all the things you do now, possibly a few things you couldn't do when you were a smoker, and you won't feel that you have to have a lit cigarette within easy reach to do any of them. After a month in intensive care, an almost month-long coma, and having beat back the infections, the breathing tube was removed. We could speak to each other, and for the first time, Linda became aware of what had been happening to her, and that her condition was still precarious. One night, as I got ready to leave the room for the night, she looked at me almost plaintively and asked me if I would come back later and stay until visiting hours were over. She was frightened in a way I hadn't seen before, and even though I felt exhausted myself, I told her I'd be back as soon as I ate and ran some errands. Shortly after I came back later, there was a noticeable earthquake. We're in Northern California, so we're neither too surprised nor scared by it. But moments later, an alarm sounded on the console in her room, indicating a drop in her oxygen level. The room suddenly looked like a scene out of the old TV show ER, as the night staff filled the room. I was pushed aside as they scrambled to resolve the problem. The night crew was led by an intense nurse that Linda had dubbed Miss Saigon, due to her bad attitude and Asian ethnicity. Linda, being from New Jersey, and a former nurse herself, had a very short fuse when it came to the attitude and practices of hospital staff. It became obvious that they couldn't find the reason for Linda's nose-diving oxygen levels, and the room became more tense and intense as the team prepared to perform a tracheotomy. Linda was confused, then panicky, and she began to cry. I'll never forget the look on her face, like a frightened child. Her eyes were so wide and so worried that I started to cry just looking at her. I tried desperately to think of something I could do to help. I can only point to my years as a roadie and my experience in troubleshooting as the reason for what I did next. Aside from picking up on and being frightened by the intensity and concern of the staff, Linda seemed otherwise fine. We had been talking just before the earthquake, and there was nothing unusual about her behavior when the alarm had gone off, so I did some quick analysis of what else could be wrong. It came to me quickly that a sensor clipped onto her fingertip, which is how the machine monitored her oxygen level, might be the real reason for the deficient readings in her oxygen level. I stepped into the fray, and in the most authoritative voice I could muster, suggested they switch the sensor with a new one. They did, and her readings normalized immediately. Roadies know, many times the biggest problem has a simple cause, like something's unplugged or a cable's bad. That night was the first and the only time that I had come back after later, and I don't like to wonder what procedures they might have performed on Linda that night if I hadn't been there and things hadn't played out the way they did. Life does what it does, and more often than not, it's best to go with your instincts, which I guess is simply life's way of giving you directions. Linda was finally moved from intensive care into a private room to begin a long journey back from being deathly ill. She'd been immobilized, fed intravenously for 5 weeks, and her legs and arms had atrophied. Doctors were cautiously encouraged about her survival, but were pessimistic about a full recovery of all her physical functions. She had to learn to do everything again. Eating would tire her after only a few bites, a serious problem because she desperately needed to gain weight, having gone from 145 to 90 pounds. I arrived every morning around 7, as they were waking her for the day, and stayed with her until she had some sort of physical therapy or until lunch, which was another form of therapy. A specialist helped her learn how to chew and swallow. That was my time to go out to my car, eat my sandwich, and smoke. But that's when I realized I had, though not consciously, altered my smoking habit. While she was going through all this, I had been putting off my smoking breaks, so I would be with Linda in her room as much as possible. This was the first inkling in my mind that there might be a way to trick myself into making it possible to stop smoking, that I may be able to find a way to make it less traumatic to quit, or at least a way to do it less. Change was incremental but encouraging. One of the first changes that actually lifted my spirits was when they moved Linda to a very high-tech bed, designed to alter and change the different pressures on her body to prevent serious bed sores and other complications. It relieved her from pain, but it also allowed me to gently maneuver my arms around her fragile body and hug her for the first time since she'd been hospitalized. That was a huge lift for my spirits. After more than 3 weeks in a new room and numerous sessions with rehab specialists, she had barely learned to stand up for a few moments on her own. That was a milestone, because she was then transferred to a rehab facility at a different hospital, which would lead to her return home and eventually to a normal life. We had all begun to think that she was going to survive. That was big. Most days in rehab, Linda would have a session with one or more therapists in the afternoon to relearn some basic skills she would need to get along on her own when she went home. We celebrated each time we thought about her going home. That is how much everyone doubted her recovery during the first months of her hospitalization. Whenever she had these sessions, I would leave and sit in my car for an hour or so and smoke. A lot. When I returned, we would often watch Oprah, another favorite of Linda's and most women I know in the free world. At first, like many males, I would make disparaging remarks about Oprah. Then, I heard about the year she spent hundreds of thousands of dollars for Christmas gifts for poor children in Africa. That impressed me, and from then on, I would not allow myself to make fun of Oprah time anymore. She was too nice to make fun of. I felt she was using her ridiculous wealth and influence to try and do something good for others less fortunate than she. And in my book, that gets you a free pass for a lot of otherwise frivolous activities. For better or worse, Oprah is okay in my book. Besides, it made Linda feel good to watch her show, and that alone got her a lot of cred with me. Each night I would kiss Linda goodbye and go home for a few hours to sleep before getting up and starting all over again the next day. She had to learn to walk, how to lift things, the stuff of everyday living, like making a sandwich or heating a can of soup. As she worked through it all, we finally allowed ourselves to believe she was going to live. And I would have to quit smoking by the time we were back together on the outside. I finally had my own reason to quit. How the hell would I do it? Thanks for watching this chapter of my book. Come back for the next chapter and to continue on the road of quitting at your own speed like I did. And please let us know how you're doing and if we are helping you to stop smoking once and for all.